Hello everybody, how are you all doing? It's the weekend. I hope you're all having a nice one. I hope you've got some nice plans. I don't really have any plans. Lockdown, being locked down still. All our plans have gone down the toilet. But we're probably just going to chill. It's a bit cooler here now, thankfully. Good news for me because I'm just not really designed for the heat. Good news for you because you don't have to sit and look at my sweaty face, just my regular face, which probably isn't much better to be honest. I wasn't with you yesterday. I think mainly because of the disappointment of the petting zoo that we went to. Turned out not to have any baby goats after all my excitement. That was a massive. I got that completely wrong. No baby goats for me to feed, and I was so disappointed. I spent the whole of yesterday crying. I didn't really, but I was really disappointed because I love baby goats. Sorry about that. And we are in. We have no baby goats, sadly, in execution, but we are in execution. Maybe about a third of the way through the book. Still quite a long way to go on this journey. Alex and Z and Simon have escaped from Furnace Penitentiary. They've also escaped from a military complex just now in the middle of the city where a bunch of scientists and soldiers were trying to basically tear them apart to see why they're involved in this whole scenario, led by the kind of horrid, always smiling but definitely evil Colonel Alice Panettiere. And the world is basically being invaded by Furnace's creation, so the streets of the city and the wider country beyond are basically overrun with rats and berserkers and other creatures that we will meet later on. Alex has learned also that he can control the berserkers just by thinking things. If he thinks about something, the rats too, if he pictures them doing something, they have to do it. It's like a command. So he is able to control Furnace's creations, and it's really weird for him because all he wants to do is kill Alfred Furnace. But he seems to have found himself as Alfred Furnace's right-hand man. What does he do in that situation? They've literally just rescued Z from Colonel Alice Panettiere's chopper, which crashed, and Lucy was there as well. So now Alex, Z, Lucy, and Simon are about to make their way into the city in a chapter called Decisions. I clambered out of the chopper, thinking we were under attack again. Lucy was screaming, Z too, and they both looked like they were about to throw themselves back through the hatch. It took me only a moment to identify the source of their panic. The berserker that was perched on the upended chopper. Its hackles were raised, a loose growl emanating from its throat, although it seemed to be in control of itself. It took a lot longer than a moment, almost a full minute, for me to calm the pair of them down enough to explain what was going on. "You're telling me you can control it?" Z asked, his face warped by disbelief. I focused, silently ordering the beast to keep its distance, to give us space. It did so, hopping back down to the ground and retreating to a flower bed, staring aimlessly at the setting sun. Z opened his mouth, but I knew what he was going to ask. I don't know how, I said. I just can. The berserkers have saved my ass. They saved yours too. "You mean that one on the helicopter?" Lucy asked. "The one that brought us down?" "Yeah." "You told it to jump on a helicopter, and it did?" Z asked. "I didn't even think they understood English or anything." "They don't," I struggled, unsure how to describe it. "It's like they can listen to my thoughts. Like I can send messages to them. Not words, just images. Like I can transmit things into their heads." "The same way Furnace can," said Z, the words making my skin crawl. "No," I stuttered, breaking eye contact, trying not to think about the implications of what Z was suggesting. "It's not the same. I'm not like him." "So the berserkers are your pets now?" Lucy asked. "There's a black suit with us too," I said, trying to ignore the venom in her voice. "But go with it, okay? He can help us get out of here." I lowered my voice so the suit below wouldn't hear. "He might be able to get us to Alfred Furnace." There was movement inside the Chinook and voices. I jumped to the ground, offering my hands to help Z and Lucy. They saw my arm like a sharpened stake pointing at the heavens, and not surprisingly they shook their heads, making their own way down over the wheels. Simon followed them, landing beside me. He looked at Z, then at Lucy, frowning. "How come you guys got cool uniforms?" he muttered, looking down at his bedraggled clothes. "No fair." The black suit appeared from the other side of the helicopter, and for a moment we all stood there awkwardly, nobody quite sure what to say. It was the black suit who broke the silence. "This is touching," he muttered. "Friends reunited. Do you want me to find you all a room, or are we all okay to go?" "I thought you guys weren't clever enough for sarcasm," Z said, although he was standing behind me, peering at him past the crook of my elbow. The black suit sneered, then turned and started jogging away from the burning building. We trod in his shadow, the two berserkers loping along behind. We crossed the garden and reached a small rotary, a sign telling us that this was the way out. I must have glanced back 100 times as we went, checking the chopper doors, waiting for Panettiere to appear with a rocket launcher in her hands, ready to blow us all to kingdom come. But there was no sign of her, and 5 minutes later the hospital was out of sight behind a bank of trees. "Should have let me kill her," I mumbled beneath my breath as I ran to catch up with the others. We found ourselves on a main road, all 4 lanes deserted. The only vehicle in sight was an army truck parked by the hospital gates, and the black suit ran over to it, his gown fluttering as he disappeared into the cab. I looked to my left, to where a vast black cloud hung over the city, like something from one of those horror films where weird forces are unleashed from the skies. Except the cloud was nothing more exciting than smoke, so much of it that it looked as if night had fallen over those few square kilometres, putting up walls of darkness and threatening never to let in the sun again. The pain in my head pointing right towards it, no matter which way I turned. It was there. It was like there was a leash inside my skull, a wire that wanted to pull me in that direction. I had an idea that a leash was exactly what it was. "So, what's the plan?" Z said, his eyes wide as he took in the cancerous horizon. "You know what the plan is," I replied. "It's the same as it's always been." "You're going after him," said Lucy, standing on my other side. "You're going after Furness." "What choice is there?" I asked. "Look at the city, guys. It's a graveyard. And how far has it spread?" "Far," said Z. "We saw the news reports while you were zonked, back when the news was still being broadcast. It's pretty much nationwide now, over the borders too. The whole country's been quarantined." "They say the death toll's in the millions," said Lucy, almost choking on her own words. "And that's not including the kids that have turned." She looked at me and I could see the hate there, gone in less than a second as she got it under control, but still simmering underneath. She let her head drop, swallowing hard, and I got the impression she was biting her tongue. Z walked to her side, slotted his hand into hers, and squeezed. She didn't let go. Another pang of jealousy twinged inside my chest, and I thought about how different things might have been if Z had been the one to change, and I was still normal. The dream was too painful, and I tried to pretend it didn't exist, turning back towards the city. "There's only one thing we can do," I said. "Going to the police, to the army, it won't work. We know that now. They'll just try to kill us. And for what? To make monsters of their own." Nobody argued. How could they? We'd all seen it for ourselves. "And we can't hide. Not forever. The country's gone. Finished. No matter where we go, we'll never be safe." "We could find a boat," said Lucy. "We could try to get abroad." I realised something was glinting, throwing light against her skin, and I remembered the St. Christopher medallion around my neck. I was amazed it was still there after what I'd been through, and I hoped that was a good omen. "You made me promise something when you gave me this," I said, touching it tenderly with my new fingers. "You made me promise that I'd make things normal again, and I will. I'll do that by killing Furness. I've promised it to you, to everyone. I'm not going to give up on that." She looked at the medallion, hypnotised by it, and she nodded. "But you can go," I said. "I'd understand." Z, Lucy and Simon exchanged glances, and they must have been reading each other's minds, because they all shook their heads as one. "Let you get all the credit," said Simon. "No way, man. I want my medals too." "Even if you have to risk your life for them?" I asked. He spluttered, waving the thought away with his bigger arm. "You kidding? We've broken out of the world's worst prison, killed the warden, fought his berserkers and lived, taken on the army and won. How much more dangerous can it get? Compared to all that, I bet Furness is a total pussy. Let's find him and get this over with. It was impossible to resist his enthusiasm, and before he'd even finished speaking, the four of us were laughing. Total pussy, eh? I said, my chest heaving. I wondered if Furness was listening in on the conversation, the way he often seemed to. Wondered what he thought of the insult. I was tempted to ask, but I didn't dare. Our laughter was just a rowing boat, floating on a lake of fear, ready to be sucked under at any time. The thought of meeting Furness still terrified me, made worse by what I'd seen in my visions, the boy with the strangest blood. I settled for saying, I hope you're right. I'm right, said Simon. I can feel it. He'll cack his pants when he sees us, when he sees what you can do with his berserkers. Yeah, said Lucy, giggling. He'd better have plenty of bog roll wherever he is. And then we were howling, so much that I almost couldn't stand upright, so much that we didn't even notice that the black suit had started the truck's engine until he pulled it up next to us. He peered out of the window, one eyebrow raised, and the sight of him staring at us like a stern parent made the laughter come even harder, until I was doubled over and thinking I'd never be able to take a breath again. I leaned against the side of the truck, wheezing, the tears rolling down my cheeks, the berserkers watching us with intense curiosity, uttering bizarre, chuckle-like grunts of their own. I don't know how much later it was that we managed to collect ourselves, climbing inside next to the black suit. I pulled myself into the passenger seat, only just able to fold my mutated body into the space, my head scraping the ceiling. I reached down, flicked a lever, and rolled the seat backwards, earning a yelp from Z as he, Lucy and Simon climbed onto the rear seat. Leave me some room, Z squawked. I'm being crushed. Oh, stop moaning, I said. You've only got little legs. But his muttering didn't stop, and with a sigh I reached down again, fiddling with the seat until it finally jolted forwards a few centimetres. It almost had us all in stitches again. Are you comfy? Asked the black suit, with more than a little sarcasm. I think so, I said. The laughter had left me utterly exhausted, more so than the fighting, more so than the fear and the anger. It wasn't surprising, really. I mean, you give more of yourself to laughter than you do to anything, I think. I looked out of the windshield, the overcast city hanging in front of us, so dark it seemed as if somebody had drawn a blind down over the truck. So where are we heading? The black suit just looked at me. What? I asked. How the hell should I know? He said eventually. You're in charge. You're the one he's talking to. He hasn't told you where he wants you. He had, I realised. He was telling me right now, in the throbbing pain that sat smack bang in the middle of my forehead, that leash tugging on the flesh of my brain, pulling me forward. Head south. Through the city, I said. You sure? The suit asked, putting the truck in gear and gunning the engine. An image flashed up, coating reality like a layer of grime. An island. Waves crashing against its cliffs, there for less than a second, then gone. And if I hadn't been certain before I'd seen that, I definitely was afterwards. I'm sure, I said, blinking the echoes of the image away. South. The coast. That's where Furness is. And I knew something else too, something just as impossible, and yet just as undeniable. He's waiting for us. City of the dead. Hair of the dead. The city was a place of ghosts and dead things, and we drove through it in silence. I couldn't believe what I was seeing through the filthy glass of the truck windows. It was as if every living thing had been sucked from the streets and the buildings, leaving an empty shell, a dried husk that withered and crumbled in every direction. We headed south on the highway towards the heart of the city, the suburbs on either side of us deserted. Then the tower blocks began to drift out of the smog, some of them still on fire. They stood like flaming torches, their pillars of smoke like the bars of a cage that imprisoned the city. The two berserkers kept pace with the truck, even though we were travelling at over 50 miles an hour along the short stretches of road that were clear. They thundered along on all fours, or all threes in the case of the one with the missing arm, occasionally vanishing from sight every time they caught a whiff of something that might be alive, but always catching up with us. We had to slow down the further in we got. the streets littered with cars and corpses. Most of the buildings here had burned out completely, looking like the blackened stumps of teeth coming loose from the concrete. I recognised some of them, or at least I thought I did. Most were just shadows of what they'd once been. The ground was scorched, still radiating heat, so much of it that I thought we were in danger of spontaneously combusting. The smell was the worst thing, though. A mixture of burning rubber, superheated concrete, and the unmistakable rancid tang of decaying meat. It clawed its way down my throat, a fist inside my guts. If I'd had anything inside me, I would have puked. The truck was big enough to shunt most of the stationary cars out of our way. When we came across something bigger, I called in the Berserkers, commanding them to clear a path. It was difficult, and they didn't always seem to want to, as if the only orders they found easy to follow were the ones that involved bloodshed. But with a little patience, they managed to obey, even working together to shift a massive oil tanker out of the road. We might even be able to house train them, said Z, as we watched the gleaming metal cylinder bounce down a hill, shedding gasoline as it thumped into the side of an office block. It detonated a few minutes after we started moving again, the shockwave shunting us along the street. I looked at the fireball in the rearview mirror, wondering whether there was anyone else alive left to see it. "This can't be real," said Lucy as the truck roared into what I vaguely remembered as being the theatre district. The vast stone obelisk outside the doors of the underground station here had been sheared clean in half and now lay over the main road. We slowed to a crawl, and we were almost level with it before I realised that there were corpses propped along its length, like dolls on a shelf. I was here, 3 weeks ago, with my mum. We came to see Greece. Feels like, I don't know, it feels like a million years ago. Now I don't even know if she's... Lucy put a hand to her mouth, screwing her eyes shut. She wasn't crying, though. It looked like she'd done enough of that. There probably weren't any tears left in any of us, or so I thought. "Your mum will be okay," Z said. "We'll find her." Lucy ignored him, leaning forwards and grabbing the back of the driver's seat, spitting her words at the black suit as we drew level with the enormous pillar. "You like what you see?" she demanded. "Is this what you signed up for? Look at those people. Just look at them." He did, turning his head and studying the bodies, their unblinking eyes reminding me of crows along a telephone wire. And when the black suit laughed, a deep, grumbling chuckle the same volume and pitch as the truck's engine, Lucy lashed out, slapping him across the head again and again, screaming at him. The truck lurched as he tried to batter her away, both Z and Simon having to force her back into her seat. "Better keep her under control," the suit said, pushing down on the pedal and turning right at a junction, "lest she wants to end up dead out there too." There was something in his voice, though. Not quite a tremor, but close, and when he turned the next corner I noticed that he was gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned the colour of old parchment. "Bastard," hissed Lucy from the back, her fists landing in her lap. "You'll get yours. We won't always need you, you know." It was only after a few minutes that we saw our first rat. It came out of nowhere, launching itself over a pile of rubble and hitting the side of the truck so hard that it bounced off, sprawling on its arse like an upturned bug. It didn't seem like it could remember how to get up, and we all watched it squirm and wriggle as the black suit drove us on. The image of the rat's face, though, stayed with me long after it had disappeared from sight. A girl, no older than 10, one of her pigtails still in place and her red-rimmed glasses hanging around her neck on a cord. There were others here too, their dark eyes watching us from the gutted buildings. A couple more attacked, but they were weak and slow, and the Berserkers quickly put them out of their misery. I realised that they must have already been close to death, or they would have left this place long ago, following Furness's clarion call as he ordered them to spread out, to attack new towns and new cities. Or maybe they hadn't moved on because some part of them remembered being happy in the city. Because deep inside them, past the overpowering strength of the nectar, they remembered who they were. Not for the first time I thought how unbearably cruel it was that the nectar only worked on kids, that adults were spared its power. I watched the faces of Furness's children stiffen once the Berserkers had finished with them. I prayed to a god I didn't really believe in that they were going to go somewhere good. By the time we reached Monument Bridge, the smoke-paled sun was disappearing behind the handful of skyscrapers that still remained. The black suit flicked on the truck's lights, painting the ruined city in an eerie, flickering glow, like the ghosts of the dead were rising from the steaming tarmac. He kept the same slow but steady speed as we drove over it, the thrum of the tyres changing pitch. Beneath us, the river was as black as tar, but there were things moving in the water, bloated shapes bobbing up and down with the tide. "Stop here a minute," I said to the suit. He mumbled something, but he obeyed, pulling the truck to a halt in the middle of the bridge. I struggled to unlock the door, my new fingers not quite up to such a delicate task, eventually managing to swing it open. I walked to the barrier and peered over the edge. "What is it?" said Z, running to my side. "We probably shouldn't stop here. It's not—" And then he looked down, and the words dried up in his throat. The river was swollen with corpses, hundreds or maybe thousands of them, all floating slowly under the bridge like logs. The ranks of the dead were so thick that I could barely make out any of the river's surface, their flesh and tattered clothes rippling in cruel imitation of water. Countless gulls and other birds sat on the bodies, riding their portable feasts downstream, their screams so loud, so much like human cries, that for a terrifying moment I thought the dead were calling out to us. There's so many of them," Z whispered. "How can this have happened?" I shook my head. There was no answer I could give. I turned away, my shoulders slumped, but Z grabbed my arm and pointed at something in the water. "What's that?" he asked. "Down there, look." I followed his finger, struggling to make out what he meant. Then I saw it, a shape pushing itself up between two corpses, a body the colour of wet bone, two spider-like arms jutting up, wrapping themselves around what had once been a woman in a red dress and lazily pulling the body beneath the water. The creature's head was the last thing to submerge, and it seemed to gaze up at us as though through wide eyes blackened by nectar. Then it was gone, the bloated dead filling the space where it had been. "Was that a berserker?" he asked, pulling his army jacket tight around his throat. "They're in the water too." I walked back to the truck, my brain trying to simultaneously make sense of and forget what I'd just seen. Lucy and Simon were peering out of the window, looking at me expectantly. "It's nothing," I said before they could ask. "Forget it. Let's just move." I jumped back into the truck, slamming the door. The black suit had kept the engine idling, and when Z had clambered in, he set off again. The headlights were bright, but the smoke muted their glare, like we were driving through fog. Then the near-invisible sun finally dipped below the horizon, and night fell instantly, as if somebody had flicked a switch. I realised that none of the streetlights were working. Outside the truck, the berserkers howled to each other, and there were other noises too. Distant shrieks and calls, creatures celebrating the darkness. The city was obviously less deserted than I'd first thought. "Which way now?" the black suit said when we reached the end of the bridge, stopping at a set of traffic lights even though they showed no colour. "Just keep heading south," I replied, thinking about the island. "Is it safe to be out here in the dark?" Lucy asked, sitting forwards. "Maybe we should find a place to take cover." It was so gloomy that it looked as if the world outside the truck's windshield had been erased. The black suit squinted into it, gently revving the truck's engine. Something shrieked, the noise dropping down from above. I pictured the buildings here, the rats that crawled inside, waiting to pounce. The suit must have been thinking the same thing because he nodded. "Let's just get out of the city," he said. "It'll be safer on the other side." He pushed us forward, around the hulking shell of a tank that loomed up in the middle of the street, taking a road that angled diagonally to our left. One of the berserkers that was escorting us, the Minotaur look-alike, shot off to the side, its giant fists flailing at a shape there, but I couldn't see what it was. "How come the rats still attack us?" asked the black suit. "Because their brains have turned to mush," he replied without hesitation. "They're Furnace's version of a biological weapon, a short-term measure to overwhelm and subdue the enemy. Their sole thought is violence, to attack, to bite, to spread the nectar into their victims." "Like a virus," I said. "Yeah, like a virus." They don't care who they infect. Adults will die because the nectar can't take with them. It eats them from the inside out. Most kids will turn into other rats, but some will go beyond that. Berserkers. The suit nodded, picking up speed as the roads began to clear. The noise of the engine rattled the whole truck, and I had to lean in to hear what he said next. The ones we can catch in time, that we can program, operate on, will become black suits. But there aren't too many of those yet. There's been no time. This is phase 1, shock and awe. These rats aren't designed to live very long, few days, few weeks at most. Then the nectar dries out. Some of them can keep going for longer if they remember to feed, and if they can work out that drinking more nectar keeps them alive. That's unlikely though. That much nectar pumped into them so quickly, it ravages them, snaps their mind clean in half. They won't even know they're still alive. But they're just kids, I said, unable to believe what I was hearing, even though I'd already known that was the truth. Like me, like you. They're nothing like me, he growled. They're not even animals, they're weapons. You don't feel sympathy for a bullet once it's been fired for a gun, so why feel any for a rat once it's served its purpose? Only the chosen few get to become black suits. Don't you remember anything from your life, though? I asked. From before you returned? The black suit flashed me a warning look, his eyes like sharpened steel. I had no life before the tower, he said. He must have been one of Furness's soldiers, not the warden's, turned in the tower in the city, the one that had been destroyed with me almost still in it. Furness is my father. That's where the elite forces were created, not like Cross's pathetic half-breed spawn inside the prism. He returned his attention to the wheel, which is why I'm so surprised that Furness has chosen you, a prisoner, not quite black suit, not quite berserker, not quite anything. We swung onto the southbound highway, using the hard shoulder to avoid the cars and vans that had been abandoned on the main roadway. Something about this road was familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Not that I really had fingers. So why does he want me? I said, watching this speedometer smoothly circle the dial, taking us up to 60. The black suit shrugged, opening his mouth as if he was about to spit, hacking up words instead. Beats me. Maybe it's because you're such a freak. Usually when people get to berserker size, they lose their minds, and you haven't. You're a failure. Maybe he wants to see you for himself, learn from his mistakes before he puts you down. He's not going to get to do that, I said. The black suit smiled, the gleam of his teeth in his eyes brighter than anything outside the windshield. Yeah, you tell yourself that. I felt something squirming in my gut, but I wasn't sure whether it was anger or fear or a combination of both. I swallowed hard, trying to bury the sensation before it could fire up the nectar again. I could feel the poison in my veins, but it didn't show any sign of waking. Either that or I was getting better at controlling it. Something flashed by outside, a green sign, and without knowing quite why, I said, "Take the exit ramp." The black suit pulled off the highway, accelerating up a hill and blasting onto a rotary, taking the exit that I pointed to. The pain in my forehead shifted to my temple, telling me I was going the wrong way. Somebody shouted something from the back seat, and I had to turn around, asking them to repeat it. I said, "Where are we?" yelled Simon. I wasn't quite sure, but something was telling me to go this way. Not Furness, but something different, some other indefinable instinct that made me direct the black suit down a long, sweeping, residential road, past a row of shops and over a second, smaller rotary. "Somewhere safe," I said eventually. "Somewhere we can spend the night." "But where?" Simon asked again. We turned right, houses on both sides, but no sign of life from anywhere other than the occasional hungry-looking cat watching us from the shadows. I guided the black suit down 3 more roads, each shorter and narrower than the last. And it was only when we pulled into a street packed tight with semi-detached houses that the memories came flooding back. They cut through the constant white noise of the nectar, the way they always seem to eventually, and I finally understood where I'd brought us. The truck pulled to a halt right outside it, almost bumper to bumper with the little blue car I knew so well, the one I'd named Humphrey when I was 8. Next to it was a tiny garden, untidy but packed with spring blooms, a cobblestone path leading up to the front door. It stood open, welcoming me back. "It's my house," I said, turning to face them, tears in my eyes. I'm home. Oh, we'll leave it there half an hour, because I think the next 2 chapters, I will probably cry the next 2 chapters. Yeah, we'll read them tomorrow. And maybe we'll get 3 because they're quite short. Oh, crikey, really short. Might get through 4 chapters tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, we'll leave it there because it's a weekend. But I hope you hope you enjoyed that. That was again though, I'd forgotten. Yeah, this is quite gruesome. That river of corpses, and like I have no idea what a rotary is. That's something that my editor had. We call them roundabouts here, I think. A rotary, is that like, it makes me think of rotary chicken, or is that rotisserie? Maybe that's rotisserie chicken. Oh, I have no idea. Didn't get much sleep last night again, as you can probably tell. So join me in the morning tomorrow. We will crack on with Execution. And whatever you are doing this weekend, I hope you have a really lovely time. And stay safe and well and happy. See you tomorrow. Bye.